IHART is an extension of Ethnos360. Ethnos led their members to include plaintiff to believe that IHART was an independent group that investigated allegations of SA at Ethnos. Since the Grace investigation, defendant Ethnos had presented IHART as an independent, outside organization hired to conduct investigations into allegations of abuse within various locations operated by defendant Ethnos that had surfaced during and after the Grace investigation. Further, defendant Ethnos represented that the purpose of IHART was to provide more accountability to our members, transparency to our ministry partners, and training to raise awareness and vigilance in these areas of protecting children. In reality, IHART was never an outside independent investigative group. Rather, it was formed by Ethnos and was supervised by a law firm hired by and answering to Ethnos leadership. IHART's trademark is registered and owned by defendant Ethnos. Teresa Sidebotham of Telios Law was appointed by defendant Ethnos as the head of IHART and was the coordinator for the majority of IHART investigations from 2014 to 2023. Telios Law has a long history of working for defendant Ethnos. Ultimate investigative decision-making in plaintiff's IHART investigation was directed by Teresa Sidebotham, not the investigators conducting interviews of plaintiff. Upon completion of the investigation, IHART made recommendations that were then submitted to an Ethnos committee. Any organizational policies, changes, or actions were decided by the Ethnos committee. First IHART interview. After submitting her report and not hearing back from IHART for over a month, plaintiff emailed IHART and finally received a response that resulted in a brief initial phone call with one of their investigators. On or about August 9, 2021, plaintiff was interviewed by two IHART representatives, one male and one female. This interview lasted for approximately 3 hours. Discussing her SA was extremely difficult for plaintiff, and she expressed to the IHART representative that she preferred to write what she had trouble speaking about. Neither representative demonstrated much, if any, experience with investigating child SA disclosures, and neither behaved in a way that demonstrated knowledge or experience with a trauma-informed interview. For example, when plaintiff shared that she at times felt as if the trauma made her crazy, the female investigator responded by telling her that it would be good if plaintiff's memories ended up being false so that she could move on and not focus on it. In September 2021, approximately 1 month after the interview, IHART contacted plaintiff and informed her that her situation was outside of their team's mandate and that a different IHART team would be in contact with her to schedule yet another interview. Plaintiff questioned Ms. Sidebotham concerning the need to sit through another trauma-inducing interview. Ms. Sidebotham replied by reiterating plaintiff's need to subject herself to another interview. Second IHART interview. The second IHART team contacted plaintiff to set up another interview. Despite being aware that plaintiff would rather communicate in writing when articulating the specifics of her abuse, IHART requested that the interview be in person. The second IHART team included a female investigator as well as a female trauma-informed counselor whose role was to help ensure that plaintiff felt comfortable sharing and could translate the emotional aspects of her disclosure. The IHART counselor did not have any counselor-patient relationship with plaintiff, nor did she provide any therapeutic support to plaintiff. On November 12, 2021, plaintiff met with two IHART representatives in a hotel conference room. This interview lasted for approximately 4.5 hours. The IHART representatives once again required plaintiff to share the details of her child SA. Once again, neither representative demonstrated much, if any, experience with investigating child SA disclosures, and neither behaved in a way that demonstrated knowledge or experience with a trauma-informed interview. Between November 2021 and the spring of 2023, plaintiff had very little, if any, communication with IHART. Upon information and belief, neither the IHART investigator, the IHART counselor, nor Ms. Sidebotham contacted law enforcement or any Child Protective Services team to report that a credible report had been made that a U.S. citizen, Horling, had engaged in illicit sexual contact with a child. Plaintiff. Third IHART interview. In the summer of 2023, plaintiff was concerned about the lack of communication or action and reached out to IHART again. IHART requested a third interview of plaintiff, which was to occur via Zoom. The third IHART team included the same IHART investigator and a new second IHART investigator. The IHART counselor was not present for this interview. The third interview reviewed the same allegations and asked clarifying details, such as the location of the event, plaintiff's age during an event, and the details of her recollection of each event. At one point, plaintiff spoke with one of the IHART representatives named Dee about whether the crimes perpetrated by Nate Horling that she had reported during her 3 interviews would be reported to law enforcement by IHART. Dee responded, "The stories you shared happened in Indonesia, so there would be no need for us to report it to the police here." The other investigator at the meeting chimed in, "The U.S. law enforcement doesn't care. The U.S. police don't have jurisdiction, so we have to fill in that gap." IHART statement of findings. It was not until November 10, 2023 that plaintiff received IHART's statement of findings regarding plaintiff's abuse disclosures. The statement of findings contained a summary of Horling's findings abuse, but it did not identify him by name. Instead, the report referenced him as an NTM missionary. Without further explanation, the IHART report concluded investigators determined there was no sufficient corroboration to conclude that plaintiff was the victim of SA by the adult NTM missionary. The IHART statement of findings regarding plaintiff's abuse disclosures were replete with material misstatements and omissions that failed to accurately convey the information plaintiff had reported during her 3 extensive interviews. Plaintiff also received a letter from Brian Coombs, defendant Ethnos360's director of personnel, regarding the statement of findings. In his letter, although Mr. Coombs addressed plaintiff's disclosure of peer-on-peer abuse, Mr. Coombs completely omitted plaintiff's disclosure of adult-on-child abuse. IHART never provided plaintiff with any information regarding the scope of its alleged investigation or the methodology and/or standards used in assessing and determining findings regarding her abuse, other than the requirement for corroboration in the form of a witness or a confession from the reported perpetrator. Since most acts of SA against children are perpetrated in private, such a standard unrealistically limited any positive finding of child SA. Defendant Ethnos never provided plaintiff with counseling or professional services to assist her in healing after issuing the statement of findings. After receiving the IHART report, defendant Ethnos never reported any of plaintiff's disclosures of abuse by Horling to law enforcement or a child protection agency, despite mandatory reporting laws. Defendant Ethnos publicized to its membership that they were supposed to report sexual abuse to IHART and allow the entity to handle such allegations. Teresa Sidebotham is defendant Ethnos' lawyer who served in the dual purpose of overseeing the IHART investigations, but also legally advocating for the protection of the organization. This misrepresentation led plaintiff to believe that defendant Ethnos was intending to independently and properly investigate the claims for the purpose of promoting the safety of other children, providing healing services to plaintiff, and working to promote justice. This misrepresentation by defendant Ethnos induced plaintiff to subject herself to over 9 hours of interrogation about child sexual abuse from representatives she was made to believe were qualified, experienced, and trauma-informed. Furthermore, IHART intentionally withheld from plaintiff the scope of its investigation and the methodology and standards used in assessing the reported claims of abuse. Plaintiff was made to believe by Ethnos representations that her report would empower Ethnos to identify and hold abusers accountable, while also providing plaintiff much-needed services such as counseling and helping to change Ethnos policies and procedures in order to prevent others from being harmed. Defendant Ethnos and Teresa Sidebotham both knew this representation was false. This was done for the sole purpose of protecting defendant Ethnos. Had plaintiff known the truth, she would not have participated in a process that was not designed to find the truth, but to protect the institution. Defendant Ethnos, through IHART, took plaintiff through hours and days of intense interrogations. This was represented to be for an impartial and independent investigation, but in reality, it was in furtherance of obtaining evidence for the primary purpose of protecting the organization.